Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the La Papaya wash processed Ecuador from Goût & Co. And there's the bag right there. And Goût & Co, based out of Chengdu, China. And this is their third ever appearance on this channel, having recently reviewed the Kiarngara AA, a wash processed Kenyan coffee. And I was very excited to see Goût & Co offering this one, as the La Papaya Mejorados have been our most reviewed coffee on the channel this year. So this felt like a great opportunity to compare and contrast it to the one-half La Papaya Mejorado that we were reviewing simultaneously, but also a great opportunity to compare and contrast it to the other La Papaya coffees that we reviewed on the channel this year. So I'm looking forward to discussing this one, as this right here is day 50. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I actually like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for this coffee, once again, it is in line with our previous experiences with this coffee roaster, which we've identified as being on the lighter side of things, very light by most standards and metrics. Now, as far as the La Papaya Mejorados that we've reviewed on the channel this year, I feel like this one's probably second only to the one that we'd reviewed from H&S, which was an extremely light coffee. But even then, this one is still very light and pretty close to that in general. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 22, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and the cup is actually quite nice, as it's well within the expectations for a Mejorado, offering plenty of sugary sweetness, a slight bit more tea-like than we've usually experienced from these coffees. In addition to that, some citric fruit qualities that are moderately reminiscent of other Papaya Mejorados that we've reviewed this year. Clean and mostly direct, and overall pretty nice start. Day 25 through the Chemex, and this was a little bit more of a mixed second impression, as it does continue to offer plenty of the sugariness, but perhaps a bit more of the listed tea aspects this time around. Citric components slightly higher than other Mejorados, but the coffee still continues to feel pretty early, as it's been pretty consistent with the Goût & Co coffees that these coffees usually feel a little bit too early to be consumed around this day 25 mark. Day 28 to the April brewer, and there are more mixed impressions of this one, as it does continue to offer plenty of the sweeter candied aspects, but it didn't necessarily cool off particularly well, as there are more of the tea aspects within the finish in a slightly uneven sense, a bit of florality, but still feels like there hasn't necessarily been too much more to this coffee as of this moment. Day 31 through the V60 with some lower extraction adjustments, and this is usually the way I go with Mejorado coffees. We've had so many reviews, and that's usually where I seem to find the best success, is lowering the extraction of these Mejorado coffees. So I think conventional wisdom would say to push this one, given the profile of this coffee. However, it continued to remain pretty consistent, a bit more focused with some of these sweeter Mejorado aspects. It does seem to struggle in the finish yet again, as it continues to be a bit uneven with a bit more of the tea, floral, and citric aspects yet again. Day 34 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and there's been a little change, as the coffee has been pretty consistent up to this point with a mostly tea-like base, with the Mejorado aspects present in a complementary but less intense manner. A slight bit of peachiness is also present, but it's been a pretty subtle experience relative to the, we'll say, slightly more robust tea-like aspects of this one. Day 37 through the V60 with our standard recipe, and it did feel like it's the best it's been to this point, with more of the sweetness present. The entirety of the coffee is presenting itself a little bit more in a tea-like sense, which has been a little bit of a shift, and it's at this moment I kind of really considered the experiences we've had from Goût & Co in general, and the coffees that we've had from them all seem to have a little bit more of a tea-like theme and a little bit more of a tea-like tone. So I'm wondering if that's the direction that they're really trying to go with for their coffees. This one was another example of that, but given that it was so different from the other Mejorados that we've had, that's when it really started to connect that maybe that's the direction that they really want their coffees to be. A bit more brightness than typical for a Mejorado, with a strong sugariness lingering within the finish. Day 40 through the Chemex with our standard recipe, and this felt like the best it had been to this point. So even though it wasn't necessarily the best first experience we'd had brewing it this way, it was much better this time around, as there's a better focus on the Mejorado-like sweetness. And they do have a lot of notes on here that would definitely hint towards a Mejorado sweetness. So they do have that brown sugar note listed on here. They also have the honey pomelo, which I've oftentimes described that Mejorado sweetness as being reminiscent of honey as well. And that was very evident within this coffee, as there's better citric sweetness and perhaps a slight bit more peachiness this time around. The cup is presenting itself in more of a tea-like sense yet again, with a bit of savoriness to it, but I feel like it was made up for with all of the other wonderful qualities within this one. day 43 through the Chemex, and it does continue to perform better in this brew method. As its best right-off brew, it continues to accentuate so many of those sweeter Mejorado qualities before it cools down into a brighter, more citric forward cup with a tea-like base, a slight grape feel and an herbality, giving it an almost citric soda feel to it. And I think that's just very interesting because it's been pretty different from a lot of the other La Papaya Mejorados that we've reviewed on this channel up to this point, most notably in the fact that it's better right off brew as opposed to the other ones, which do seem to improve as the coffee does cool down. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s, so let's go through those. We'll start with the cleanliness level 4. Obviously, fully expected level 4 within this coffee. I do have to say that the definition of a lot of the aspects in this one did continue to improve with time. Even then, it was never really at risk of sacrificing that level 4 in terms of the cleanliness, as it's pretty much a pretty clean coffee. Finish, level 4, and I'm kind of surprised that the finish didn't necessarily go in the direction that I was hoping for. These Mejorado coffees do tend to have that kind of lingering, long-lasting toffee, brown sugar, honey, however you want to describe it, finish to them. This one didn't necessarily have that. It was a little bit more citric, bright, and savory in terms of the tea direction, so just a little different in that sense, not necessarily what I was looking for in this one. Sweetness, level 4. That's probably going to be the biggest sticking point to me on this coffee because I've had so many other La Papaya Mejorados that have been just so sweet to the point where they have justified a level 5 mark or even the higher side of level 4. This one right here, while it is probably the sweetest coffee that we are reviewing from Goût & Co., it still wasn't necessarily quite as sweet as I was hoping for and expecting for something like this. Acidity, level 4, and once again, that's a little bit of a surprise. Usually when it comes to the brightness of these Mejorado coffees, it can be hit or miss. It can be a little bit brighter, can be a little bit more moderate, but this one definitely did lean a little bit more on the brighter side of things relative to those other ones. So level 4 was the best direction I can put on this one. Florality, level 4. And I continue to mention that honey-like aspect that can be present with a lot of these Mejorado coffees, and that's the best direction I'm pointing towards for this florality, as there was definitely a fair bit of that. I mean, it is still offering plenty of the Mejorado substance, a lot of that Mejorado-like characteristic to it. So level 4, certainly the best place for me to put that one. Citrus fruit, level 4. And once again, that was pretty interesting to me. I'm not necessarily sure I got an overly well-defined citric quality within this one. It just felt like a little bit more of an uneven citric tone that kind of contrasted the rest of the experience within this coffee. So level 4, best place I could put on that one. We move on to a couple of level 3s. We'll start with the stone fruit level 3. I did mention that there was a very brief peachiness to this one, which did give it just a little bit more depth, as otherwise the coffee was pretty direct in terms of the tea-like aspects and the Mejorado qualities to it. Caramel level 3, once again, that's that Mejorado honey toffee quality that you want to describe it as. So level 3 felt like the best place to put it. And then 2 more things worth discussing. We'll start with the savoriness, level 3. That's a really big one given that it continued to offer so many more tea-like aspects than I've usually experienced from these Mejorado coffees. What's very interesting about this coffee is that they do have that tasting wheel and they do have tea-like listed at a level 4. And I'm really hoping that the priming effect wasn't at play here because I could definitely see this one just offering so much more of that kind of herbal tea tone relative to the other Mejorados that we've reviewed from Juan Peña in general this year. Final thing worth discussing, body level 2. I feel like that's probably a component of us brewing this one with the Chemex. Even then, I've said in the past that the Mejorado coffees can be kind of hit and miss when it comes to the body. Some a little bit more medium bodied, some a little lighter at that level 2 mark. But this one right here did end up at that level 2 mark. And as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. Alright, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I said going into this review that I wanted to compare and contrast it to the 1/2 coffee, and what's so interesting about the 1/2 Mejorado is that one really seemed to struggle a lot early on, and then it improved so much over the course of time. This one right here was a little bit more consistent. I would say that it started off better, and then towards the end, it seemed to kind of plateau. It never really seemed to improve in the way that the 1/2 one did, so I feel like I was left with a much more positive experience on that coffee, mostly because of just how much it improved towards the end. Whereas this one right here improved incrementally, and then towards the end I said, okay, the best I'm getting from this coffee is that it just seems a little bit more balanced, a little bit more even, and just slightly better defined than some of the earlier days. But that's to say, I think I had higher expectations for this coffee, and given that I've had such positive experiences with a lot of the other La Papaya Mejorados, it's being held to a very high standard, and I don't necessarily think it reached the same extent as some of the other ones that we've reviewed this year. Even then, it is still a Mejorado coffee. At the end of the day, I very much enjoyed it right from the onset. type of person I would suggest this coffee to. That's pretty much the best direction to go. If you do enjoy your Mejorado coffees, then what this one offers that's unique from the other ones is that it is much more tea-like. The first note they have listed on here is scented tea, and that's what makes it kind of interesting because it didn't necessarily offer that same amount of sugariness. It didn't offer quite as pointed and direct of that brown candy sweetness, rather a little bit more of a honey-like tone to it. Outside of that, it still has a nice sweetness, a little bit more brightness, so just a little bit of unique characteristics while still having that Mejorado quality to it. That's the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the La Papaya wash processed Ecuador from Goût & Co. Thank you for watching.